This is just great, but I am truly appreciative in all sorts of ways that you will never begin to know. And then in ways that are so unique to the Babson tradition, as this notion of the last lecture began to emerge, just in the last couple of days, my office has gotten all sorts of emails and phone calls. Like the one that came in yesterday, redistributed to me from Stan Park at Sodexo, because apparently Sodexo sent out a note saying that Trim was going to be closed. And Stan Park sent out this notion with the menu for tonight. And so one undergraduate student said, Len's last lecture, does this mean that the ultimate entrepreneurial challenge isn't going to be offered next fall? So no, I am not Len Green. Okay, so becoming Len Green would be my ultimate entrepreneurial challenge, by any stretch of the imagination. The second one that came this afternoon, obviously from a grad school, forgetting that this is a school-wide event, said, are they serving beer? And so if that was you who called, just see me at the end. We got one can, okay? And you've got to have an ID, okay? But other than that, no, we're not serving beer. And then the good news was at noon today, just in the hopes that maybe I hadn't thought about this at all, Cole Bettles. Where are you, Cole? Are you here? Yeah, see, there's Cole. Cole actually wrote a speech for me. It has a distinctly Democratic flavor, so as a consequence, I'm not going to give it today. But he did talk about every time I give a speech, he seems to be playing the piano and then says, and because of that, it was great. So if this isn't going anywhere, in about 10 or 15 minutes, what I'd love for you to do, Cole, is just get up there and play on the piano. I actually saw the first ad for this, I don't know, about a month ago, and I stormed into Tracy Petrillo's office because she's my chief of staff. And I said, who the decided this? And what is this idea of the last lecture? Now, I understand at the grad school there's a tradition of last lectures, but I actually went pretty deeply into understanding the genesis of the concept of a last lecture, and it usually is a last lecture, right? In fact, the story behind the last lecture was someone who gave a lecture just before he passed, and it was an extraordinary lecture, right? I certainly don't want to have any connection to that. And so I want to kind of lay out a set of expectations. Okay? First of all, this will take longer than 10 minutes, so I want to be clear about that. So if any of you need to take a bathroom break, there's a short introduction now, and it'll kind of get you through it, and you can come back to that. So the second piece is, yes, this is my last lecture. This is my last lecture in Night Auditorium in the month of April, 2013. That immediately precedes my last undergraduate class, which starts at 6:30 tonight at Olin College Academic Center, and is before at least 14 last events that I have leading up to my last commencement on May 18th, before my departure from the day-to-day role on June 30th. So why am I saying this to you? I have a deep personal need to reset the gravitas of the moment. And I want to lower your expectations accordingly. As I listened to Matt give his introductory comments and Chet give his introductory comments, I leaned over to my daughter and said, well, oh shit, there goes my commencement speech. Now, the person who works with me on the commencement speech, Diane Fullman, is somewhere here in the audience, right, Diane? And so she can testify to the fact that I am telling the truth. They just screwed the whole thing up. Nothing. And so we got to redo that. The good news is this speech wasn't that profound and that good, so you couldn't have possibly known anything I was going to talk about tonight. So having lowered your expectations, let me kind of lay out a few logics for tonight. One is, this is really designed as a conversation. So this is not going to be a speech, this is going to be a conversation. There are going to be parts where I will just call out, discuss. Okay, and when I call out discuss, okay, that means you are supposed to turn to your right, turn to your left, turn around, any place you want to go, and discuss. And discuss what we're talking about, not just to have a chat. And it's designed as a conversation in the tradition of act, learn, build. All right? Act, learn, build is the new logic for the profound words of creation that I invented, and appears to have resoundingly impacted about 6 people positively. And in the spirit of self-publishing a book with the word creation, we now talk about act, learn, build when it's on somebody else's dime. And so the esteemed social scientist Kurt Lewin of the University of Michigan in the 40s was fond of saying that there was nothing as practical as a good theory. And so what I want to do tonight is I want to reverse the logic and suggest that there's nothing as theoretical as good practice. And I want to talk about practice. And so with your active participation, let's see if we can actually build some useful theory here this afternoon. As I said, I'm going to prompt some conversations with 6 short stories that come out of actually my career and provide some time for each of us to reflect on the lessons that either provided for me or for you or for both of us. And then we'll see if we'll be able to build on those lessons in some useful way. So let's just start. $27.95 at the Babson bookstore. So story 1, okay? My first night as a production team manager at a Procter & Gamble paper plant in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Having been raised in New York City, it was reasonable to classify this as my first overseas assignment. Also, unlike a number of you, I got a daytime MBA. And it prepared me in no way, shape, or form for what happens in factories on the night shift. It's 1973, and I am responsible for a crew of 23 making Puffs facial tissue. When there's 200 sheets that go in a box of facial tissue, there are 200 monster rolls on this big machine that are spinning and getting cut into sheets and getting stuffed in a box by little gremlins. And then getting sent out to your local supermarket. It was a tough union shop, the United Paperworkers International Union, and the average seniority on my shift was about 600 years. So there's this thing called a color change, and in a color change you take down 200 yellow rolls and you replace it with 200 pink rolls. Or 200 white rolls. And so there's a lot of movement involved in that, and you've got to take all the rolls off, you've got to move them into a storage area, you've got to bring all the rolls in. And because I had an MBA and I had trained for this job, I industrial engineered the task. Okay? And I figured out, from an optimal productivity standpoint, it should take about 65 minutes. Historically, there was a head operator who really ran the crew, because as I said, it was a union shop. As soon as they knew there was a color change on the production sheet, they wrote 90 minutes. Because that would leave enough time for lollygagging, a couple of cigarettes, some coffee. So the first night I had a color change on my own, on the shift. I was not going to lose 25 minutes of productivity. I was going to single-handedly ensure that we began to reduce the costs of Puffs facial tissue so we could ship across the Mississippi River and all Americans could have access to this extraordinary product. So I tell my head operator, his name was Norb. In fact, 13 people on my crew were named Norb. Those were the ones not called Romy. And so I tell Norb that I'm not going to pencil in the 90 minutes for the color change, nor is he. And he laughed at me and said, "That's what it takes, young man. What would you do now? Discuss." Okay. I trust that was easy, right? You all aligned around what to do? So let me tell you what I did. So as the color change started, I immediately went to the floor to actively supervise what was going on. I got on a fork truck to show one of my operators exactly how I wanted those parent rolls taken off the machine and put back on the machine. After I did one roll, I turned around and discovered there was absolutely nobody left on the floor. They had all walked off the job, went to the break room for a smoke and a laugh. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I called my wife, told her what happened, and asked her what I should do. At her direction, I went to the break room and apologized. Did any of you have that? Okay. So what's the lesson here as we build theory? Lesson number 1, people simply don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. People simply do not care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. All of you are in varying stages of an education which celebrates all that you know, and be careful about the way in which your knowledge is perceived by others. Pretty simple. Story number 2. We're now 12 years later. We've gone from 1973 to 1985. From 75 to 85, I was a doctoral student and a faculty member at the Harvard Business School, spending most of my time worrying about the design of manufacturing jobs and factories to enhance employee productivity and quality of work life. And I had began to get excited about the application of these ideas to service organizations. All of you are way, way, way too young to remember this, but in 1981, there was an airline that started up called People Express. And they flew from essentially Boston and Buffalo to this warehouse terminal in Newark for $19. All the employees were owners, and it was the fastest growing public organization in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. Grew to over $1 billion of volume in its first 18 months. I had the opportunity to live inside there for a large part of 2 years and believed that I really began to understand how these ideas that had worked out in manufacturing settings were going to apply in service settings. And wanting to actually test those ideas, I ended up becoming the executive vice president and chief operating officer at Au Bon Pain, the French bakery cafe that was headquartered here in town. At the time I got there, it had 19 restaurants. It had a great reputation, but it had never seen anything remotely close to profitability. And the job was to figure out how to position this organization to improve execution at the point of customer contact, to enable the organization to grow dramatically. And when you have no profitability, it's hard to spend more money on overhead. My assumption is that's not a hard concept to deal with, okay? And so since we had no money to spend on overhead, and we had this commitment to building an extraordinary enterprise, I had this crazy idea that we had talked about. We simply turned over the problem about profitability at the store level to our best store managers and made them partners. We acted as a second-level landlord. So what we essentially said was our average return in a store was about 18%. We said, okay, we expect an 18% return on sales at the store. Everything that the partner manager was able to generate above 18%, we were going to split 50-50 because that sounded American. Not very sophisticated construct, right? And so all we wanted them to do is make sure they didn't change the name and they didn't change the menu. Okay. Within 6 months, Gary Aronson, who was one of our first store managers, was making $30,000 a year before we started the partner manager program. Within 6 months, he was annualizing at $150,000 a year. And the story and Gary was a Harvard Business School case and an Inc. magazine cover story. So within 6 months, going from $30,000 a year to $150,000 a year. How would you react to that explosive growth in income if you were given the problem of figuring out what to do at Au Bon Pain, now that one person had figured out on a moment's notice how to generate essentially in this case, $240,000 of incremental profitability out of a store that we were systematically incapable of being able to generate that profitability from? Discuss. How many people think Gary Aronson making $150,000 for being a fast food manager in an undeveloped system was too much money? You should have gone to Harvard Business School, because all of those thought it too. So we do this case, and I go visit the Harvard Business School, and people are appalled. How could you ever pay somebody, a sandwich jockey, $150,000 a year? And Gary Aronson listened to all of this, and at the end of the class said, these people are trying to explain theoretically why this shouldn't work and why the incentives are distributed improperly, and they have this notion that somehow customers take care of themselves and stores manage on their own. And so the lesson I thought was pretty clear, and it was a pretty important lesson for me, which is never underestimate the capacity of people who actually do the work to show you how to do it better. What if I actually knew that before I helped my Romies and Norbs over at P&G? Next, story 3. Discovering the cycle of failure in services and developing the service profit chain. So I did all this work at Old Pan, had an extraordinary opportunity there, really built the business in a variety of different ways. And after 3.5 years, decided that I had really done the work that I had come there to do, and that there were more important things to do in the multi-location service business organization. So I took a year off. I went back to Harvard Business School, took a year off from the restaurant industry. I was precluded from participating in the American fast food restaurant industry because of all the secrets I knew. So I went up to Canada and worked on a coffee chain. But because it's always a few years behind. And so, but it came back to the United States. And got a 3-year project, which really was my claim to fame as an academic. From 1990 to 1993, I had the blessed opportunity to redesign Taco Bell. Now, for someone who's a vegan, I'm just doing atonement for the sins that I manufactured in the late 80s and 90s. And I swear, 3 years, I never ate a thing. I couldn't look at it. It's just amazing, the extruded guacamole and all this. It was just awful. But we actually did extraordinary organizational work, okay, in trying to figure out how to build a store that could actually deliver product to someone when they were paying 59 cents for dinner. Now, all of you might say, who pays 59 cents for dinner? And the answer was, in the spirit of market segmentation, for those of you that fancy yourself to be marketers, they were called penny-pinching hoofus. They were thrift-oriented, high-frequency fast food users. Used fast food for more than 12 meal occasions a week. You could tell, usually. All you had to do was see their skin. It was just it was amazing. And we actually came to understand deeply what actually made for a high quality experience for these people. And we called it FACT. Fast food fast, orders accurate, in a clean environment at the right temperature. Hot food hot, cold food cold. Fast, accurate, clean at the right temperature. And people said, but you're not talking about the food. And I said, well, for 59 cents, you don't want to talk about the food. You just don't want to talk about the food. And so we came out of this, and it was an extraordinary learning opportunity, and we began to kind of worry about the multi-location setting in a variety of different ways. And I don't know how many of you have ever had this experience, but I've had enough different jobs. My father, when he was alive, was an upholsterer, and he's a Holocaust survivor along with my mother. And all I wanted to do, I don't know how many of you have gotten through this experience yet, you might not be old enough. All I wanted to do is, at least at one point in my life, have my father say I was extraordinary. Just once, right? Just once. I'm sure you're all working through the same crap. And so I invited my father to one of my speeches, a group like this, right? They wore suits, okay? But essentially a group like this, and they paid. And I wanted him to sit in the back and really kind of get a sense of what I do. And so this was a speech that was coming off all of this work about the keys to great service and the keys to organizational success. and I had a flip chart, and I'm walking back and forth, and I'm pacing and going through all this thing, and I said, you want to know the secret? Find out who your customers are. And then I get into the whole logic of the penny pinching hufu, right? You want to be great? Find out what they want. Fast, accurate, clean, at the right temperature. You want to be perfect? Give it to them. So find out who your customers are, find out what they want, and give it to them. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the secret to success in organizational life. And everybody applauds, right? So, wow, that's just incredible. Sometimes there is a privilege that comes with a Harvard doctorate. You can say the most absurdly silly things. And they say, well, shit, he's got a doctorate from Harvard. He must know something. And so, but the reality was I went past the group. I couldn't focus on any of them. And I went right back to my father. And I said, so Dad, what'd you think? He goes, these people. Yes, he goes, they seem to like it. I said, no, I didn't ask that. I asked what you thought. He said, no, I heard what you said, which is give them what they want. They seem to like it, so this is great. So, I said, Dad, cut the crap. I want to know, what did you think? And just all I want him to say is, you're wonderful. This was just extraordinary. This was magnificent. On the other hand, he says, these people. I said, yes. He goes, they didn't know this? How would you answer him? Discuss. My answer, by the way, was, you know, Dad, for some of them I think it was a useful reminder, but I actually think for some of them it was new. So what do you really think? And he said, son, every morning when you wake up, you should start the day singing God Bless America. The fact that people pay you to say these things is nothing short of extraordinary. So there's a lesson here. The lesson is there's often a huge gap between knowing something and doing something. And at the end of the day, action trumps everything. I left there, and I go into seriously high-profile fashion retailing. Obviously, you can tell. And I go to Limited Brands. At the time I got to Limited Brands in 1999, I was leaving academia after another decade of teaching and writing. I had been a consultant to the company, a friend of the owner, founder, entrepreneur, CEO, who essentially created the field of specialty retailing as we know it today. I'd been on board of directors there. And so my initial assignment there in 1999 was I headed up human resources for 160,000 people. Not a bad training assignment. In a $10 billion enterprise with 5,000 stores. I was so over my head. I shared responsibility for the top 200 people with the CEO and also acted as a minister without portfolio. Over the next 3 years, I picked up every one of the operating functions other than merchandising, advertising, and design, was the company's first chief operating officer, and ultimately became the vice chairman. The notion of having a psychologist-trained academic as the vice chairman of a fashion company, and also for a period of time I ran all the beauty businesses there as well. Women's Wear Daily thought that this was interesting, right? I don't know how many of you read Women's Wear Daily, but you know, but they thought I was a reader, and I said relatively interesting. I said reads peculiar. Choice for a senior executive role in a fashion company. And so they sent a reporter to visit with me to do a study of who I was and what I do. And so they asked me for a job description, and I was able to respond instantly. I suck up to divas. But the divas have to sing. And I seem to know the difference between Mariah Carey and Aretha Franklin. One screams and one really can sing. I didn't say who. I didn't say who. So what's your reaction to vice chairman's job definition in a fashion merchandising firm instantly coming as, I suck up to divas? Discuss. Here's my lesson. Despite all the optimism embedded in most of my first 3 lessons, I want to kind of cement it with this one. You simply can't underestimate the value of great talent in an organization. You can create an environment that allows people to thrive and grow, but don't ignore the importance of great talent in the first place. In the word of Jim Collins when he wrote in Good to Great, the most important question is, who do you have on the bus? The most important question is, who do you have on the bus? So in 2008, I have the opportunity to come here to Babson College. I've got those lessons in mind, I've got those experiences in mind, and I inherit a jewel of an institution that was both financially and strategically challenged. There's something somewhat embarrassing about a business school that loses money. Right? We fixed that. And you're still paying for it. Well, I mean, none of you were here in 2008. The place operated 4 days a week, 28 weeks a year, and 325 acres. So I assume that someone took a first-year operations class, they would know you had a throughput problem. And instead of focusing on cost, you could focus on revenue. And if you focused on revenue, everything will take care of itself. And in fact, that's what happened. So we now operate 42 weeks a year. And lo and behold, I was a genius based on something that I learned in Operations 101. And the good news was that there was an operating team that just needed to actually be, essentially be tasked with the license to just go do what we all knew we needed to do. In order to be able to get the license to be able to do that, I went to the first trustee meeting that I had as president, and I asked them to pass a rule. And they said, well, what's the rule you'd like us to pass? I'd like you to pass a rule that prohibits the school from losing money. They thought that was odd. I said, well, you don't have a rule, and you're losing money. And they said, and if we have a rule, we'll stop losing money? I said, well, if we have a rule, I'll have a picture of you on the wall behind me, and when we make the decisions we need to make to actually stop losing money, I can point to you. When everybody wants to blame me, I just need someone to blame, okay? And in fact, isn't that what trustees are all about, which is to provide broad-scale strategic leadership and fiduciary obligation for the institution going forward? So what have we done? On day one, July 1st of 2008, I'm getting a little maudlin now because I'm actually kind of sitting back grading my own papers as I do this. And we articulated the position for the school on day one on the homepage. And for those of you that want to go back to July 1st, 2008, to understand that I am prone to hyperbole and exaggeration, but everything I'm saying here is 100% accurate. Maybe. Mostly. We said that this was a jewel of an institution, and we were not going to retreat from our competitive position, that we actually owned the space. In fact, we were going to double down, and the strategy was to cement and extend our competitive position in ways that other institutions couldn't replicate. That was before we knew the story about being an energetic number 2. It was before we figured out how to be the only, right? But in fact, the logic over the last 5 years has been, in fact, quite linear, quite predictable, and quite a bit of advantage being taken of opportunities that have been presented. Like, in fact, I don't know how many of you understand how the only idea came up. But the only idea didn't come, it didn't come from anything very sophisticated. Usually when I stand up and give speeches about it, I ascribe it all to Jerry Garcia. from the Grateful Dead, okay, who was always, willing to say that they weren't the best musicians and they weren't the best lyricists, but they were the only group that ever took their fans seriously. But I didn't get it from Jerry Garcia. I didn't get it from reading a book. Hugh, whose shirts you're wearing today, he has a blog. And the night before I had to give a State of the College talk in 2009, I go through my emails, which I'm wont to do in the evening. And there's a picture from Hugh that looks strikingly like the one that's on the back of your shirt. And it says, "Don't try to be the best, be the only." Now for that State of the College, I had 74 slides. It was absolutely the most deadly boring, detailed review of every function and every agenda for the institution you could ever imagine. And in one slide, this bozo figured it out. I violated intellectual property law. I'm confessing today. I made a copy of the slide. I went to the State of the College and I said, "You have a choice. I have 74 PowerPoints. I got one picture. Let me start with the picture and see if it whets your appetite for the PowerPoints." They got it after the picture, which is, instead of obsessing about being the best, try to figure out how to be the only. And that's in fact been a journey over the last 5 years. And we've built that uniqueness into elite status. And now what we're doing is we're preparing the community for over $1 billion of capital spend over the next decade and a half. That's a long way away from losing money. $1.5 billion. That begins to be real money. And now we're preparing to pass the institution on to Carrie Healy, whom we all support in becoming a great institution leader. So what are the lessons that I want to pass on to Carrie? And I really thought about this long and hard. Here they are. People simply don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. Never underestimate the capacity of people who actually do the work to show you how to do it better. There's often a huge gap between knowing something and doing something, and at the end of the day, action trumps everything. And you simply cannot underestimate the value of great talent in an organization. You can create an environment that allows people to thrive and grow, but don't ignore the importance of great talent in the first place. So where are we now with that? My current reality has changed exponentially. So last year, my mom, who's now 85 years old, emerged in reasonably poor health. She was living in Boca Raton, where old New Yorkers go to be depressed. And she had everything. She had health problems, she had depression, she had all of the wonders of what life is like in Boca Raton. And I had promised my dad before he passed away 8 years ago that I would take care of her. Little did I understand that my dad knew exactly what he was asking me to do. I had no idea. I just said gratuitously, of course I would. So she comes up here, and she moves up to Boston, and we discover as we're clearing out all these other things, she's got early stage Alzheimer's. I don't know how many of you have any relationship to early stage Alzheimer's, but it's a mystery, okay? So in the spirit of uncertainty and mystery, it's really a mystery. So I have these conversations with her with a fair degree of regularity that are neither linear nor logical, right? And I'm an academic who's data-oriented and action-focused. And you sit back and say, oh, geez, I'm just not any good at this, right? I'm not good at these conversations. I get very pissy, I get very angry. I actually walk out and go to my wife and say, please, just do something nice, because while I go cool down. And so over the last 6 or 7 months, I'm actually learning, quite honestly, what a friend of mine said, you're not lying to your mother, you're lying for my mother. So I've actually been learning how to lie for my mother. And I've actually also been learning that it's not lying, okay? That in fact, it is actually great listening skills, because it's easy to be a good listener if someone is making sense. It's really hard to be a good listener when someone isn't making sense, and to figure out how to deal with that. And so I've worked in my own perverted way, okay, of actually being absolutely convinced that the ability to learn how to listen has truly been a gift. So we moved here from Florida. I spent about 15 or 20 hours a week with her now to establish her in her new house and to work on her basic health issues and to provide company. And I have to admit, it's pretty strange to be in the midst of a reverse parent-child role at this stage in my life. But now I'm going to transition from this role that I love to ensure that I'm able to spend time with her that is high quality for both of us, what I've defined not as retirement, but a time out. And what I need to say is I am extraordinarily lucky to have the financial and personal flexibility to reorient my life and my career to take a time out. I've said this to the faculty, I say the same thing to you. It wasn't a difficult choice to make. It was easy. It was there. I told my dad I would do it. I do it because I can. And it hasn't stimulated 1 ounce of regret since I made the decision in early December and announced it. So what's the lesson here? After all is said and done, the lessons for a great organization are much the same as the lessons for a great life. You need to be clear about what's figure and what's ground at varying stages of your life and career. You need to realize that balance is achievable over a lifetime, but generally not in the moment. You need to recognize that all your decisions have consequences. So the continuing question for every one of you who have your grounding, is not what you're going to do, but what you're going to do next. And most importantly, because I've been looking for amazing transition lines that aren't mine, that I can work off of, is this afternoon in Smart Briefs for Entrepreneurs. At the bottom of the page, just before the copyright, there was a spectacular line from George Bernard Shaw. Again, if this wasn't being streamed, I would likely claim it as my own. But it's so good, and George Bernard Shaw is dead, so we can celebrate it. Life is not about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. Life is not about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. You go to any other school to find yourself. You go to Babson to create yourself. And I hope and trust that it's both exciting and meaningful that each of these steps, the process of moving from finding yourself to creating yourself, right, provides you the kind of learning that I've been able to have and I've been able to outline over the last 40 years of my professional career in life. So 3 things. 1, thank you for the privilege of serving as your president. 2, it truly has been an honor. And 3, and on most days, a joy. Thank you.